Today I'd like to talk about another pair of concepts. I like to think about things in terms of pairs and then examine the tensions between them. And in this case, I want to talk about the relationship between science and power. What is the connection between those two things? And in drawing out this connection, I also want to draw out another theme of this course, the way in which science connects to things outside of the scientific enterprise. There's a tradition in the study of the history of science which tends to look at the development of science outside of a kind of cultural and social and political context. There's another tradition that attempts to look at science and its connection to the broader social, cultural, and political world in which it exists. I obviously belong to that latter tradition, and I want to follow that up today by talking about how science is connected with power. There is a kind of standard distinction that's drawn between the word science and the word technology. Science is a kind of intellectual activity that involves figuring out how the world works. Celestial mechanics and physics, biology and geology, all these kinds of things. Chemistry, how does the world work? But one of the interesting things that people discovered that in describing effectively how the world worked, they produced knowledge that could be used to transform the world and actually make the world work in different ways, to manipulate it, to control it, to produce new kinds of things. And applied science, applied knowledge is, generally speaking, for purposes of simplification, referred to as technology. So technology is the application of scientific knowledge to do something in this world. You take modern chemistry and physics, you apply your knowledge of that, you can split the atom and produce a nuclear bomb. You can split the atom to produce incredible amounts of electricity. That's an example of where science spills into, quite literally, the realm of power. Power in the production of electricity, but power in a more abstract sense as the power that comes from having a nuclear bomb that your enemy doesn't have. Political power, in other words, and military power. That's the connection between science and power, and it flows through technology, roughly speaking, as applied science. One of the themes that I want you to think about for this course, among many, is the way that science produces new forms of power and new kinds of sources of power. The scientists aren't merely people in white lab coats who are trying to describe the world. They also become people who gain power over us through their knowledge of the world. There's a wonderful satirical movie by Stanley Kubrick called Dr. Strangelove. And in this case, it's the scientist, Dr. Strangelove, who creates this ultimate doomsday machine using scientific knowledge, who becomes the ultimate power, an arbiter of power in the world. And that's an excellent illustration of the transformation of the scientist into a new source of power. In this new world where science produces power, states get very interested in making sure that they have the best science because they recognize, not simply because they want to understand how the world works or make us progress in our knowledge of the natural world or of the cosmos. No, they want a payback for this knowledge in the form of power. So scientists, beginning in the 1900s, but particularly in the 20th century and on up to the world that we live in, become systematically engaged, governments do, in funding science. And of course, whoever funds the science wants to direct it in a particular way. And here again, we see the connection between science and the broader political world. The way that the interest of non-scientists begins to shape the scientific enterprise, just as the science itself begins to transform the political, social, cultural, and economic world. Again, I'm interested in our course in these connections between science and other things, and in particular the connection between science and power.